Hi there. This is a presentation, a sort of work in progress on the anatomy of Homo vertias. Homo vertias means noble man, or spiritualized man and woman, that is. Um, I'm just using the word man as a reference to the genus of Homo sapiens sapiens, which is called man, but of course it includes women as well. It's just that to make it grammatically correct, you have to have man and his or him, you see. But it includes her and she and that, just a grammatical thing. And it's just a classification, taxonomy consideration. But anyway, never mind about that. Homo vertius, cultivated man, spiritualized man, in contrast to Homo normalis, which is a term that Wilhelm Reich coined for people that are not evolved, and are not in either they are repressed by the veneer of society, or they're out of control, which is the other side, of course, of social repression. So Homo normalis, Homo vertius. And towards the anatomy of Homo vertius, a sort of anatomy of the brain of Homo vertius, how it might be, or just an anatomy of the consciousness of the spiritualized person. So here we have, the Homo normalis, considered as brain, as neurological process, consists of hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain or frontal lobes. The hindbrain is just really the regulation of automatic algorithms to do with the body, with hormones and things like that, and breathing and things. But of course, all these sections of the brain are linked. Obviously, it's not a strict partition between any of them. In fact, the whole model basically is flawed, deeply flawed. But anyway, it's sort of working model, as it were, really. Then you've got the midbrain, which is basically all the instincts. You go towards something favourable. You go away from something which might be unfavourable. So in the midbrain is the kind of binary, strict binary world of animal instinct, as one might say. And then the frontal lobes, which of course are well developed in the human being, as they are in other sentient beings such as dogs and dolphins. You've got the forebrain, which is basically looking at life not from the instinctual level, but from a bigger picture, as it were. And it's a bit complicated to explain. I mean, I had this joke about, there's this guy, Dr. Christian Conti, on YouTube, who's got a channel and talks about, anger management. And his wife and himself come on to talk about, relationships and marriage and all that. And I was tempted to put a comment saying, let's get this straight. Then the midbrain says, I want to have sex with Conti's hot wife, because she is pretty hot, and my forebrain comes out with a statement. There is so much wrong with that statement, I don't know where to start. Okay, well, the joke works better in context, I suppose. But for example, the midbrain is about, you've got a box of chocolates beside you. I want to eat chocolates. And then you end up eating all of them. And if you've got a real midbrain problem, you'll go out and buy another box of chocolates and eat them as well. Or the other side of that is, this chocolate tastes funny or nasty, and you spit it out. Okay, so that's sort of midbrain activity, broadly speaking. Front brain activity looks at the whole question of eating chocolate and processed sugar. For example, these might be personal beliefs which are not supported by any empirical evidence at all, or indeed supported by any further rational thought. But these beliefs are sort of rationalizations, I suppose. Um, Drawing also on sort of old wives' tales as well. So a little bit of what you fancy does you good. That's an old wives' tale. Many people have this as a belief, personal belief. I don't know whether it's a belief that's supported by any evidence at all. Chocolate obviously, releases endorphins, and endorphins calm you down. So you could say that chocolate's good. Chocolate is quite good for calming you down in a stressful situation, or if you're rather depressed about something. But obviously, it's not very good for long-term depression because then it becomes a chocolate addiction. Um, and then, of course, all things in moderation. Um, which is what was I doing? Yeah, all things in moderation, which is the first thing on this list. There's a sort of Buddhist kind of thing, I suppose, where balanced, within a balanced, healthy lifestyle and balanced, healthy diet. Chocolate is no bad thing. Processed sugar is no bad thing. And after all, processed sugar is not heroin. Okay, nothing like heroin, a different scale. So the conclusion is to have the occasional chocolate. Take the chocolate now, but don't eat the whole box full and don't eat it every day, on the hour sort of thing. You could have one chocolate per day, I suppose, really, if you're going to like count it out. But that's a bit sort of a bit like the alcoholic who has the same amount of alcohol every day at the same time, but they've just learned to control their addiction. But it's still an addiction. But anyway, but you're nowhere near addiction. So you take the chocolate and you eat it, and or somebody gives you a chocolate, and then it becomes like a social thing that you have chocolate with somebody else or whatever. That's important. Rules of and hospitality and what have you, and sort of respect for other people's wishes, and they want you to have something that so you accept the gift and all that, and eat it and be grateful for it, and that's all part of social bonding. But of course, all these could be post hoc rationalizations for the fact that your midbrain just wants chocolate, just wants the center, the pleasure center of the brain. There's a thing called a pleasure center, which is to be stimulated, and it produces all these ad hoc rationalizations for why you just want to stimulate the pleasure center for no other reason than you want to stimulate the pleasure center, and the pleasure center is demanding stimulation. And so you start off with rationalizations, but it quickly develops into a chocolate fest, a chocolate's indulgence anyway. That's why the arrow kind of links these two, midbrain, forebrain, as a relationship between them, but a very complex one. And there's a relationship between, spitting out the nasty tasting chocolate, to the kind of remembering, things that do taste nasty could be off, like milk has gone off, and perhaps is dangerous to eat. So that's why you spit it out. So, there's rationalizations and belief systems attached to spitting out the nasty tasting chocolate, which may or may not be true, but generally speaking, it is true that things that taste nasty could have gone off and could therefore contain bacteria which could make you sick. So it's a rational response to spit out the nasty tasting chocolate because there could be something wrong with it. It could be out of date or whatever. So this is the relationship between the midbrain and the forebrain. And the hindbrain, of course, just does all the stuff like the spitting and the eating, and things like that, I suppose, roughly speaking. Um, and then I've got here that there's a sort of pre-brain. Now we're going into metaphysics. We're going from the physics of the neurological structures of the brain to a kind of metaphysical model, where I say there's a kind of pre-brain, which is soul. And soul, on birth, enters the neurological processes of the brain and the function, the structure of the brain, and operates as the ghost in the machine. But then there is something a bit more than this, beyond the forebrain, beyond all the moral considerations and logical considerations and analysing of beliefs, etc., of the forebrain, of the frontal lobes, is a thing called the postbrain. The postbrain is what I call the postbrain is the uniting of all parts of the brain and of soul to create this sort of consciousness, a pseudopodium of consciousness, as it were, which projects beyond the brain, something perhaps to do with what the forebrain chakra. Something to do with that. I'm not quite sure about that, and extends outward to and penetrates the dimension, the veil of the abyss, and connects your current brain with the next dimension. And on death, if you've cultivated this post-brain consciousness, as it were, when you develop this post-brain will take your present consciousness with you, and to penetrate the veil of the abyss, and will actually propel your consciousness into an awareness of heaven, putting it in metaphysical terms and in allegorical, symbolic, romantic terms, one might say. So that's kind of this thing. It's a uniting of all parts of the brain, and I was contemplating, this story about the guru. One of his disciples said to him, what is, I think his question was, how do I get to enlightenment, or what's enlightenment like, or how do I become enlightened? And the guru put the Chila's face in a stream, and nearly drowned him. And when he dragged him out, the Chila, or the student, was going like that, and the guru said to him, "What was on your mind as you were being pulled out of the water?" And what was on your mind, if you can remember it, about when you were under the water. And the student said, "Air, air, air." And the guru said, "Well, quite so. That's how much you should crave enlightenment. It should be, like you want air." So I sort of take this story as a metaphor for the fact that you should really cultivate your mind to the point where what you have cultivated in your mind is equivalent to the air that you breathe, and you believe that what you have cultivated is as essential to your life as literal air. So I'm thinking here of the kind of spiritual exercises that are mentioned in Magic by Aleister Crowley, in the first part called Mysticism, where he talks about cultivating a steady mind, for example, and breath awareness, and posture. You bring posture, breath awareness, and the power of visualization, for example, together to create a trinity of mental forces, very, very disciplined forces, with the result being that because you can visualize, say, a red triangle, with such clarity and for such a long time, that you develop other mental powers as a result of this simple spiritual exercise, which will enable you to carry out magical rituals in a way that is totally beyond anybody else's normal comprehension of carrying out rituals. So you can imagine people, go to rituals for fun, or they go, or to upset their parents, or to for money, or to get a girlfriend or a boyfriend or whatever. But this is serious magical practice. You're on your own. You're not doing it for any other purpose other than to penetrate the veil of the abyss, which takes an enormous amount of mental discipline, and it's mental discipline that you develop, that you cultivate, and it becomes as natural to you to be able to concentrate and to be able to penetrate the veil of the abyss as it is breathing. as it is natural to breathe. So, but whereas breathing, you're born with obviously with the ability to breathe. You've got to develop your mental powers so that they become like breathing. Okay, that's what I understand from Aleister Crowley's book Magic, Part One. Where he talks about the development of concentration and trance as well. So you have to be able to go into trance, like somebody, remembers their kind of the front door, or remembers to breathe when they're underwater or something like that, or, remember to breathe when you come out of the water. You think of that poor unfortunate student coming out of the water and saying air, air, and the guru saying, well, that's how much you've got to crave enlightenment. So you've got to actually create your mental environment to such an extent that you might as well be, trying to breathe for air as you come out of water. So that's part of what I would call the development of the anatomy of Homo vertias. You're developing this post-brain consciousness, which is able to extend beyond space and time, beyond this dimension, into the spiritual dimension. But I guess this is sort of bordering on hermeticism. In fact, it's very hermetic. And I've made a lot of videos in the past saying that I didn't approve of hermeticism, that I considered this to be sort of left-hand path practice. Whereas the right-hand path is you wait for them to call you, you don't call them, as it were, and them being the spiritual powers or the powers that be. But I mean, some people have said, well, what about a balance between right-hand and left-hand path? Is there not a union between practice on the one hand and faith on the other? And indeed, when people practice the piano, for example, they have faith that they're going to get better at playing the piano as a result of their regular practice, which I don't actually do anymore, which is very, very reprehensible of me, because, you definitely do get better at playing the piano if you do practice your scales and arpeggios and things like that. Definitely do. It's been proven over and over and over again. And if you practice sight reading, you just get better at sight reading like you do ordinary reading, And if you don't practice, the muscle atrophies, the brain muscle atrophies. And so if you don't practice mysticism regularly, the mystical muscle, as it were, in quotation marks, atrophies, But some people say, well, don't worry, because the Holy Spirit will come and help you anyway. So then there's a big argument about, whether the left hand or the right hand path make sense separately or together or whatever. But we won't go into that because that's already been covered to an extent. But this is really just a sort of working contemplation. I don't claim to have the answer. I don't claim that I have an eye into this metaphysical anatomy. I'm just saying it's a model that you can use, and perhaps the model itself has a psychological effect on the mind of the person who is alive contemplating this. I don't know, or whether there is actually a dimension which you can actually penetrate by actually cultivating this post-brain consciousness, as it were, which unites the soul consciousness and the consciousness that you have at present, unites them all together in one package and sends that package through to the other side, in quotation marks. So that I thought I'd just leave you with this sort of working contemplation. I don't know whether this will be useful to you in your practice or useful to you in your contemplation of heaven and God and the Holy Spirit and the Holy Grail. I just don't know. That's up to you to decide. But anyway, I thought I'd just sort of park it there and let you think about the points that I have raised.